You're listening to the Chapter a Day Bible Study. I'm John Stange, and today we're in Ruth 4, Boaz redeems Ruth. Ruth chapter 4 brings the beautiful story of Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz to its conclusion. An account that started with loss and grief and uncertainty, it ends with redemption and restoration and hope. And this chapter reminds us that God is always at work, even when his plans aren't immediately obvious. He takes broken situations and he weaves them into something far greater than we could ever imagine. At the end of Ruth chapter 3, Boaz had promised Ruth that he would settle the matter of redemption. In Ruth chapter 4, he follows through on that promise. Early in the morning, Boaz goes to the town gate, which served as the center of legal and business transactions. And there he meets a closer relative who had the first right to redeem Naomi's family land and marry Ruth according to the customs of the time. Boaz presents this opportunity to this man before a gathering of witnesses, and initially the man agrees to redeem the property. But when he learns that redeeming the land also involves marrying Ruth and then raising up an heir for the deceased family line, he declines. The man says this in verse 6, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." So with the near kinsman stepping aside, Boaz gladly accepts the responsibility, and he publicly declares his intention to redeem the land and marry Ruth. Boaz announces it this way in verses 9 and 10. "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife." The people rejoice and they bless the union. They actually pray that Ruth will be fruitful like Rachel and Leah, the matriarchs of Israel, and that Boaz's household will be honored throughout Bethlehem. And then the story moves quickly to a very joyful conclusion. Boaz marries Ruth, and the Lord blesses them with a son. In verse 13, we read this, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son." Their child, named Obed, he becomes a source of joy not only for Ruth and Boaz, but also for Naomi. The woman who had once asked to be called Mara because of her bitterness, she now holds her grandson in her arms. Her emptiness has now been replaced with fullness, and it's a beautiful thing to see. And the women of Bethlehem celebrate God's kindness here, saying in verse 14, "Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel." What a contrast that is to chapter 1. Naomi returned to Bethlehem believing her life was finished and that God's hand had gone out against her. And yet God had been working behind the scenes all along, meaning even in her darkest season, he was preparing blessings that she couldn't yet see. And I bring that up because so often that's exactly what's true for our lives as well. There are seasons when God's purposes seem hidden. Maybe we experience disappointment or loss or unanswered prayers or just general uncertainty. And yet Ruth reminds us that God's providence never stops. Even when we can't see what he's doing, even when we can't fully figure it out, he's faithfully arranging circumstances according to his perfect plan. Now, one of the most significant details in this chapter comes in the final verses. The chapter concludes with a genealogy. And when you look at verse 22, it says this, "Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David." Now, I'm sure to some people this may seem like just a simple family record of sorts, but it's actually one of the most important moments in the entire book. Ruth, a Moabite woman who was once an outsider, she actually becomes the great-grandmother of King David. That means that through God's grace, she is welcomed into the covenant community, and she's given a place in the royal line of Israel. And yet this story reaches even farther than David, because when we turn to the genealogy of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, we find Ruth's name there as well. Her story becomes part of the story of Christ himself. So this is where Ruth chapter 4 points us powerfully toward Jesus. Boaz serves as a picture of Christ, our ultimate Redeemer. The role of a kinsman redeemer required someone who was willing, qualified, and able to pay the price necessary to rescue another person from hardship. Boaz met those qualifications for Ruth and Naomi, but Jesus fulfills them perfectly for us. Like Boaz, Jesus willingly stepped forward to redeem those who couldn't rescue themselves. He paid the price we could never pay. Through his death and his resurrection, he redeemed us from sin and guilt and eternal separation from God. The Apostle Peter explains it this way in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. He says, "You were ransomed." Then he goes on to say, "Not with perishable things such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ." Boaz redeemed a family inheritance. Jesus redeems eternal souls. Boaz welcomed Ruth, a foreigner, into his family. Jesus welcomes people from every nation, every tribe, and every language into the family of God. Boaz restored Naomi's hope. Jesus restores our hope completely. Boaz secured a future for Ruth and Naomi. Jesus secures an everlasting future for everyone who trusts in him. Ruth chapter 4 also reminds us that God's grace often extends beyond what we expect. Ruth probably couldn't have even imagined that her faithfulness would place her in the lineage of Israel's future king. And she certainly couldn't have known that generations later, the Messiah would come through her family line. And yet that's how God works. Acts of ordinary faithfulness become part of his extraordinary plan. So today, as we reflect on this particular chapter, I think we're encouraged to trust God's providence even when we don't understand it, because the same God who guided Ruth's steps and comforted Naomi's heart and directed Boaz's actions, he's still at work today. So when life feels uncertain, remember that God sees the whole story. When your circumstances seem disappointing, remember that God is still writing the next chapter. And if you ever wonder if God has forgotten you, please remember the story that's given to us here in Ruth chapter 4. He hasn't forgotten you. Now, the book ends with a family tree, but it's really a testimony to God's redeeming grace. Through a faithful redeemer, a grieving widow was restored, and a broken family was renewed, and a royal line was established. And ultimately, that line led to Jesus Christ, the Redeemer who came to rescue us all. In him, every promise of redemption finds its fulfillment, and every believer finds lasting hope. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Chapter a Day Bible Study. For more resources to help you in your walk with Christ and your understanding of the Bible, please visit my website at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com. And if you'd like to partner with me by becoming a supporter of this ministry, you'll see a few options to do so, again, at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com or in the description of this episode. As always, thank you for your prayers, thank you for your support, and thank you for your willingness to share this content with others. Have a great day, and I'll see you again right here tomorrow.